Buenos dias. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here again and see so many smiling faces and always such a warm welcome here at Prince of Peace. Thank you so much. For the last 37 years, I have been working with the EPES healthcare ministry in Chile, and for the most part of those 37 years, your congregation has been supporting us. So on behalf of the team in Chile, I want to say muchas gracias, many, many thanks. Every 2 years, mission personnel have what's called home assignment, where we come and visit the congregations that are supporting us. And I have over 30 congregations in 7 states. So I have been visiting congregations in Minnesota, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, and New York. So when I receive emails from our staff saying, "How's your vacation going?" I said, "Well, I'm looking forward to seeing a canoe before the end of the summer." But coming on home assignment is a chance to reconnect with congregations and hopefully reignite your interest in the work that we're doing on your behalf. I'd like to start this morning by reflecting on the gospel message. I'm sure you've all heard this parable many times. What is often seen as key is the miraculous healing of the blind man Bartimaeus. But a Latin American Lutheran pastor friend of mine underscores 2 frequently overlooked aspects. First, he points out that the disciples tell the beggar to be quiet. They try to hush him up. And my Lutheran pastor friend said, "Isn't that what the church often tries to do to the poor and marginalized? Kind of shush them up. But what does Jesus do? He tells the disciples to call him to him. And in that way, he's calling us to make sure we're standing with the stigmatized, the demonized, and the people who are easily left out in our own communities. Second, Jesus recognizes the beggar's humanity. When he asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus doesn't impose a solution. He recognizes the humanity of Bartimaeus and asks him what he wants. Over the past 37 years, the EPES work in poor communities has tried to follow this example of Jesus, to affirm the dignity and rights of all the poor people and communities, where we work by involving them in defining their problems and then collectively seeking solutions. 38 years ago, when I was 25, after working in a Lutheran ministry with Chilean refugees in New York City, I felt called to move to Chile. A year later, in the midst of the brutal military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, with 2 Chilean health workers, Rosario and Maria Eugenia, and a Canadian physician, Christina, we founded EPES as the health education program of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Chile. Our goal was to improve health conditions in poor communities and squatter settlements through the organized participation of the people themselves. At the core of our strategy, as many of you know, is a program to train and accompany community health workers. Groups of 10 to 15 women gain practical knowledge and skills about common health issues and leadership training. We had learned from other successful programs around the world that educating community members about common illnesses such as diarrhea and respiratory infections could have profound effects in those communities. But for us, more importantly, by helping build local health teams, we were investing in long-term efforts to address the underlying causes of poor health. Some of those health teams have also celebrated over 30 years of working in their communities together. Well, Chile has changed and grown over these past years, and we've changed and grown along with it. We now have a staff of 18 in the capital city of Santiago, and in Concepcion, a mining and fishing area 500 kilometers to the south. We continue to train health promoters. We just graduated a group of nutrition health promoters and also a group of health promoters to address violence against women. We've also had a national and international impact. Chile has one of the highest rates of women smoking in the world and one of the highest rates of adolescent smoking in the region. You can see 12-year-old girls smoking on their way to work sometimes. Don't get any ideas, you guys. So when we started working on tobacco, we started training health workers, and then we realized we really had to change the law. And we needed to get a whole new set of skills to do that. And in March of 2012, we were able to change the law after having built a national coalition led by somebody on our staff and mobilized people, and now it is illegal to smoke in any public space in Chile. The Ministry of Health also called us a few years ago and asked us if we would design a program to train community health workers for the whole country. And we designed a program, wrote a manual, and started training hundreds of health workers for the community health clinics. We also have an international training program every January where people have come from 25 countries, including countries in Africa, Latin America, and North America, to learn the methodologies that we have been developing and using over all of these years. So in your bulletin, there's a handout, and I hope everybody got a copy of it. Looks like this, and I ask you to pull it out. If you're missing it, raise your hand so they can give you one. So I ask you to read along. I'd like to review some of the principles, and don't look at the long sheet and worry, we're not going to read them all, just 4 of them. So I ask you to read along with me the first principle. It is the people of a community who define their own community's problems, and the people who play a leading role in solving their problems. We never go into a community with the answers to the problems because the people themselves know so much more about their communities and the underlying issues that shape their health. But we do help them start thinking and analyzing their problems with simple tools like this game called Conozcamos la Población, getting to know the community or the neighborhood. It's a typical board game where we divide into groups and people roll a dice and go around the board taking questions. Wherever they land, they take a question about housing, history of the neighborhood, health services, nutrition, organization, and work. And as they move through the game as a group, they talk about issues such as unemployment, access to healthy food, access to good housing, access to health care, and so on. People ask, where are people dumping garbage? What organizations in our community are doing something to address the issues in our community? And at the end, they reflect together, what are the key problems of our community that we need to understand in order to be health promoters? And in this way, they basically tell us what we need to teach them to become community health promoters. Once during an environmental health campaign addressing an outbreak of rats in southern Chile, we found out by doing a simple exercise like this with the community that there were 6 illegal dumps in the neighborhood. So all of our efforts to write a flyer and go house by house explaining things to people were worthless until we could get rid of these 6 illegal dumps that were being brought in by companies just dumping into this poor community. So we had to build a large coalition to try to put pressure on the government to get them to do something about the illegal dumps. And finally, after doing a press conference in one of the dumps with children who had been bitten by rats, suddenly the government called us and helped us clean up that environment. Listening to people and believing them is often the key to start healing process. Oftentimes, when people in communities that have been marginalized, demonized, or left out feel like they're being listened to, they start regaining their own sense of humanity, and healing can begin, much like Jesus does with the beggar in the parable. Now, if you read with me principle number 2, health professionals are resource people who use their skills and knowledge to strengthen the capacity of local people and groups to confront their problems effectively. It's been the privilege of my life to work with so many amazing community health workers, Rosa, Valeria, Soledad, Monica. I could tell you stories all day, couldn't I, Carol, about all the things these amazing women have done. But let me tell you just one. Years ago, there was an outbreak of meningitis in Santiago, and several children in one of the communities where we work had died. People were very upset, and it was right when the transition to democracy was beginning, and they felt the new government wasn't doing enough to address their fears. So the EPE staff wrote an educational flyer and headed out to the communities to meet with people to talk about identifying early symptoms of meningitis, how the disease is spread, and where could people go for treatment. But as we arrived, we saw that people were all already gathered and they were listening to somebody. And we got out of the car and there we saw Monica, one of the health promoters trained by us, already up on a slab of cement with a megaphone, talking to people in the community, trying to comfort them and allay their fears, and also giving them a lot of the information that was in our flyer. She told us later, "I couldn't sit around waiting for you guys to arrive. That's what you taught me." There we saw Monica, as we've seen Monica, Valeria, Soledad, over the years, providing love, support, and leadership in their community. And this is why it's so important to invest in the people who live in their community, who are there 24 hours a day. Their children are growing up there. Their elderly live there. That's why investing in the local people is so key to us. Years later, the Lutheran Church in Argentina asked us if we could train health workers in the north of Argentina, but we didn't have enough staff people, so we talked about it among ourselves and talked to the leaders of the church and decided to send Monica. And she went to the northern part of Chile for 4 months and developed a program that was amazing, training community health workers. So now if you read with me principle number 3, and then I promise we're going to drop down to the bottom, to number 10. Health is not reduced to a medical commodity, but rather is seen as a result of many interlinking cultural and political forces. Chile has one of the highest rates of childhood obesity in the world now. Over half of children 6 years old are overweight or obese. It's been astonishing for us to see this change because when we started training health workers in 1982, we would weigh and measure children and teach the community health promoters how to weigh and measure children and put them on the road to health charts in the daycare centers of the Lutheran Church. And all of those children were right on the edge or below the road to health chart. Now in those communities, many children, or the majority, are overweight but still very undernourished. The obesity epidemic is thought to be killing 3 to 4 million people worldwide. And tragically and very ineffectively, obesity is usually treated as an individual problem and responsibility. A government campaign in Chile insists, elegir vivir sano, choose to live healthily, as if in poor communities it were simply a matter of choice. At EPES, we're running workshops primarily for women about how to prepare healthy meals, but at the same time, we're helping them examine the underlying causes of bad nutrition that are so much bigger than individual problems and have to do with social inequality and the multi-billion-dollar food and sugary drinks industry and its savvy marketing techniques. Tanya, one of the first health promoters to go through the Nutrition Health Promoter Program, was literally moved to tears at the end of one of the sessions, and she said, now instead of feeling blamed for her kids' eating habits, she feels angry and able to see the underlying forces shaping many of the decisions in her community. Being shown how food marketing is deliberately designed to create positive emotional responses to junk food, and how often the government promotes things like boxes of juices that are not healthy, the health promoters started getting angry and empowered to make changes. Tanya saw the larger picture. And now she's busy doing demonstrations with her team of community health promoters on healthy snacks for her kids' schools, participating in marches to defend clean water, already a crisis in 2 regions of Chile. And she's had the courage to speak out publicly to her neighborhood officials about the need for local access to cheaper, healthy grains and green vegetables, but also to defend the right to have a space where kids can play safely in their neighborhood. Now, if you jump down to principle number 10, collective action is often necessary to pressure local authorities to listen and address health problems of the poor. Mauricio and Camila are leaders from the community center of Las Cañas in the port city of Valparaiso. We met them years ago and we gave them scholarships to come to our international training program. They are amazing young people who led the disaster response in Valparaiso in 2014 after 16,000 homes burned down in their working class neighborhood. EPES has been working with them since, developing strategic planning on rebuilding and also a program to deal with the trauma faced by so many children who lost their homes. Mauricio has often told me that the fire made him realize who they were. He said, we're just a bunch of nobodies. There's no surgeon who lives on this hill. There's no judge who lives here. We're just working class people, and perhaps that's why the government never responded when we asked and requested so many times for preventive measures before the fire. And after the fire, the response was so slow and ineffective. Mauricio and Camila are both under 30 years old, and they worked tirelessly organizing volunteers in the community center after the fire, where they gave housing and food to over 300 people. Mauricio has an incredible knack for working with kids. He can get a group of children laughing and playing games in a matter of minutes. Sadly, last July, Mauricio and Camila suffered an unthinkable tragedy when their own daughter, Amelia, who was just 1 year and 9 months old, was denied a hospital bed in the ICU of a large public hospital in Valparaiso, and she died. Thousands of people, including the EPE staff, gathered in the pouring rain for her funeral in complete disbelief, anger, and grief. Over the past year, we've watched Mauricio and Camila as they've led a movement to achieve justice for Amelia by putting her death in a larger context. They understand that the underlying issues have to do with a public health system which is sorely underfunded, and the injustice of a system that provides excellent health care for those who can pay and substandard care for those who can't. That experience taught them that collective action helps transform people who feel like nobodies into somebodies with the power to make change. Just a few weeks ago, on the 4th of July, thousands of people gathered in Valparaiso to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of Amelia's death in a march for more public funding for public health. The theme was, Amelia lives in the struggle of the community for health, and the march was led by Camila and Mauricio. The EPE staff were there accompanying them as we have been over this past year, steadfastly by their sides. Now, if you go to the final one, as the story of the beggar reminds us, in Christ's self-giving love, we clearly see the worth and dignity of all people. The Church's health ministry strives to affirm and defend the health and dignity of all individuals and communities. Do you remember the 8.8 earthquake in Chile in 2010? It was one of the greatest earthquakes in history, and it shifted the world's access. The epicenter of that earthquake was very close to our center in southern Chile. So just immediately after the earthquake, we started working for what we thought would be months, but later turned into years, with families who had been displaced and were living in emergency homes. The very poorest group of families lived by the waterfront in small, precarious homes and made a living collecting seaweed, drying it, and selling it. These were the women who asked us if we could help them get back to work by providing wheelbarrows and boots. One of the leaders, Elizabeth, stood there one day and said, "Ahí está el mar, there's the sea. It took everything from us, but there it is, waiting to give it back. We just want to go back to work." So the day that we were able to deliver boots and wheelbarrows to this amazing group of women, we sat around, they brought coffee and tea and cookies, and we sat around in a community center laughing and talking. And then Elizabeth turned to Lautaro, the director of our staff in southern Chile, and said, "We've been talking among ourselves all year. There's something we really want to ask you. Why does EPES care so much about us? Didn't you realize que somos nadie? Didn't you realize that we're nobodies?" Lautaro was visibly affected by this question and then regained his composure and did his typical laugh and said, "Oh yes, we realized you're nobodies. We realized you're the nobodies who saved your families during the earthquake and tsunami. We realized you're the nobodies who rebuilt your homes. And now you're the nobodies taking this job and going back to work to feed your families. You're the most wonderful nobodies we've ever met." We live in a world where so many people feel like nobodies, or maybe it's more accurate to say are made to feel like nobodies. Who are the nobodies in your own community? Who are the nobodies that the church needs to reach out here in New York for a mission of healing and wholeness? The EPE staff and the health promoters work to obliterate the idea that some lives matter more than others. Recognizing the brokenness of our world, Christ calls the church to share in his ministry of healing and wholeness. He calls us to work together for new, more just and humane social structures, where there are no nobodies, where no one is left out. As our staff in Chile look back over these years, we feel deep emotion and gratitude to the congregations like yours that have accompanied us on this journey for so many years for health, justice, dignity, and wholeness. Through cards and emails and Skype calls and visits, praying for each other, we've developed a deep relationship of mutual support and trust. The partnership and support of your congregation with the global mission of the ELCA makes our work sustainable. So I thank you for walking with us on this journey. I hope you'll continue to walk with us for another 37 years. And I wish you the best in your lives and your work. Que Dios le bendiga. God bless you.